during the age of Jackson and right after, and then leading up into the Civil War, we see the United States enter a period of reform where many Americans were concerned with various different reforms to American society. So we're going to see a lot of that start with the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening was like the First Great Awakening in that it was a period of religious revival after 1800 that is going to again be based around growing closer to God because they felt like many Americans had gotten away from their relationship with God and their religious beliefs. So Charles Finney, who's one of the major preachers of the Second Great Awakening, are going to hold a series of tent meetings or camp meetings. And this is basically exactly what it sounds like, where it was outdoors, where you had a lot of people. They would come in, they would have, and this is not just a quick meeting or a few hours. These would sometimes last for an entire week. During the day, people who would come would go to have Bible study and prayer meetings, and in the evenings they would be listening to these very fiery preachers like Charles Finney. So this is going to lead a lot of people kind of back to their religious beliefs. It is going to be kind of centered in one location in New York called the Burnt Over District. So this is just going to be that area where a lot of this religious fervor is going to spike. We do see more people involved in the Second Great Awakening, a lot of women as well as African Americans. So again, we see that more people are participating in these religious practices, again, kind of reflecting where America is in our democracy as well. You know, we're more inclusive. So we even see that reflected in our religious revival. We see a push towards what are called utopian communities. A utopian community is like a perfect society. And when we talk about these utopian communities, what we're really looking at here are communities where everyone is going to kind of work together based on this whole idea that they all live and work together to contribute instead of having separated and lone existence. So again, everybody's going to work together. Unfortunately, even though we do have some very well-known ones like New Harmony and Oneida, as well as Brook Farm, they just simply don't work because the ideas were so radical in what they were trying to base them on. So even though we do see these, they had been really all around the world, and Europe included, and this is just our attempt at it here in America, they just don't work well. Transcendentalism is a literary and artistic movement where it's based on this belief in a simple lifestyle where people were trying to achieve this emotional unity with God, using what they believe God had given us to achieve that. And here's what makes this different. They also believe that you could achieve that unity without the actual church. The institutional church is what this means, like the whole, not necessarily meaning the building in your community that was your church, but meaning that you didn't need those rules and laws that were established by the institutional church to achieve that unity. We see several important leaders come out of this movement. Walt Whitman, who was a poet and puts together a book of poetry called Leaves of Grass, where he reflects all of these ideas of transcendentalism, as well as Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is going to write an essay called Self-Reliance, where again he's going to promote that independence. So he's going to be a major leader of this movement, as well as Henry David Thoreau, who you see in this picture. Henry David Thoreau is going to, in one of his essays, write something called civil disobedience. Now, he not only writes about this, he practices it as well. Civil disobedience is where you peacefully disobey what you believe is an unjust law. So, for example, in this case, when we talk about the Mexican War, he did not believe that the United States should be fighting this war. So he refuses to pay his tax that supported it, and he actually spends a night in jail as a result of that. So again, his civil disobedience, that peacefully disobeying that unjust law. We do see changes in education as well. At this point, most of our schools were one-room schoolhouses that housed all ages of school children in them. So again, not our idea of like leveled schooling. Everybody's working together in one room. Most children were not educated beyond the age of 10. It really just wasn't seen like it was very necessary. But we're going to see this change when we see a man by the name of Horace Mann who believed that everyone should have an access to a free, public, and high standard education. This is what our entire school system here in America is based on, that it is supported by tax dollars, and that it's non-denominational, meaning it's not based on any one person's religion. So again, he is really known as the father of our schools. We also see the reflection of our growing nationalism even reflected into what becomes known as our American Dictionary. Noah Webster, as in Webster's Dictionary, is going to develop this dictionary again, where it's going to focus on how Americans write and spell things. So so as you've probably seen before, there are words like the word color. In Great Britain, that word is spelled C-O-L-O-U-R, whereas in here in America, we spell it C-O-L-O-R. So we just are again really nailing down this American identity, and that's even reflected in our words. Dorothea Dix, who you see pictured here, she is also going to be very key in two very important reform movements. The first is going to be attempting to help and reform the way we treated those who were mentally ill. At this point in time, most of the mentally ill people were housed with criminals. They were put in the same exact institution, and she just saw that as a great injustice and worked to try to change that. So she is going to help get started various mental hospitals like Broughton over in Morganton, or if you go further east in our state, Dorothea Dix is another institution. The name of the institution that is obviously named after her because of her work to push for better treatment and for actual treatment of the mentally ill instead of just basically locking them up. Now, related to this, she's also really key in pushing through prison reform. Again, prison at this point in time was seen as a punishment. Now, she's going to have a different idea, and she's going to base it on the idea of being rehabilitation. If you are rehabilitated, it means you have changed. It means you can become better. So think of it like rehab. So she believes that the goal of our prison system should be to rehabilitate these criminals to become productive members of society after their sentences were over. So again, really pushing for the change of some of this in our culture. We see many American writers, again, instead of now focusing on Europe and all that Europe had to offer, they're focusing on American stories and American heritage. So you see that again reflected here with what our writers are, our authors are focusing on, like James Fenimore Cooper, who writes Last of the Mohicans. This was a book about, centering around the French and Indian War and our relationship with Native Americans. So again, Nathaniel Hawthorne in The Scarlet Letter, looking at colonial society, same thing with Sleepy Hollow. So we see all of these that are, again, focused on American society, whereas before they had been very much focused on Europe. Edgar Allan Poe, Emily Dickinson, who was a poet. The Hudson River School is going to be a group of landscape painters who are going to paint some of America's most famous landscapes, Niagara Falls, for example. And again, that's just going to reflect that nationalism that our country was feeling at this point in time. Alexis de Tocqueville was a Frenchman who was very interested in American democracy and how it worked. So he's going to come here, kind of tour the United States, and he is going to examine how does our whole ideas of liberty and equality, how do those work together in an actual setting? So he writes about this and really gives an objective point of view to how this works in the United States. So again, just looking at how does this work? We don't have, that ingrained ideas of a class system where we have that really super elite and then you're very, very poor. So at this point in time, he is just looking at how this works.